back in the classroom with my squeaky chair. I think it's getting serious. Zopa, he's out. He's too sick to continue, which is crazy. And their plan is to go like over the top of the mountain and not come back down to the Tibet side. And they're gonna continue on to the Nepal side, which I suppose sounds possible. Wild stuff. All right, they're headed up to Camp 5. This seemed to contradict his plan to get Sunjo over the top to safety, but he was right. From Camp 6, you have to reach the summit and return in about 18 hours. Oxygen or not. There was a limit to how much you could survive above Camp 6. If we made the summit, we would have to reach top camp on the other side in 18 hours. So what he means is like at that point, how high that part of the mountain is, your body just starts to die. You don't. There's nothing you can do. It's that dangerous. So you can only be up above at that height for so long. And we're right here. Have Yogi and Yash been to the summit? I asked. It had been a question on my mind since Zopa had announced he was not taking us there himself. Of course, Zopa said. 3 times. Huh, good, I said. Does Josh know you're not coming with us? Zopa shook his head, then gave us a blessing and said, I'll see you both in Kathmandu. Now go. It was clear and bitterly cold as we left the dark camp and started up the north ridge to the summit. It was hard to keep my excitement in check. A night at Camp 5, a night at Camp 6, then the top of the world. Ho ho! It was more of a forced march to Camp 5 than a climb. We hooked onto a series of fixed ropes. Yogi set the pace. I tried a regime of 12 steps, a minute of gasping to recover, then another 12 steps. After an hour, it was down to 8 steps, and I'm not sure how many minutes to recover. It was hard to believe that some climbers had made it to the summit without any supplemental O's at all. Josh was one of them, although I suspected on his trip he would be sucking down the O's, if for no other reason than to stay sharp so he didn't lose one of his clients. The sun came up and gave us the best view of Everest's pyramid summit yet. It was enormous. Coming off the top was a disk of ice crystals against the blue sky. The sight inspired my sluggish brain to remember the camera, which I had put in my pocket before we left Camp 4. I shouted ahead at Sunjo to wait up, which he was more than happy to do. When I got to him, I took off my outer mittens, pushed the record button, and tried to imitate JR as best as I could. What are you feeling right now? I asked. You're less than a mile away from the highest point on Earth. I had him framed perfectly against the summit. Frightened, Sunjo said, and hopeful, and worried about my grandfather. I had no idea it would be this hard. That's about all my unmitted fingers could take. I can film you now if you'd like, Sunjo offered. No, that's all right. We have to get moving. But a half hour later, we saw our first corpse. Sunjo saw it first. I walked up to him as he was staring down at it. Yogi had breezed by it as if he hadn't noticed, but I bet he had. It was a woman. About 50 feet away was another corpse, but I couldn't tell what it was because it was lying face down. I had never seen a dead person, let alone a frozen dead person. She looked like a wax figure, more like a wax figure than a former human being, and in a way this was even more disturbing to me. She had been there a while, if her shredded clothes were any indication. It looked like she had died sitting up and had fallen over on her side. She was only a few hours from her tent at Camp 4. I'm not sure how long we stood there, staring, and we would have stood there a lot longer if Yogi hadn't shouted at us to hurry up. After 5 more corpses, I stopped looking. At night, we came up to a steeper part of the North Ridge. It was much colder. The fixed ropes had frozen, and Sherpas had chipped shallow steps into the ice to make it easier to climb. Yogi waited for us to catch up to him. He pointed to the tents down at Camp 4. then to the tents at Camp 5, and said something in Nepalese. Halfway, Sunjo translated. 6 hours to go. To make that 6 hours worse, the wind picked up. We had to bend over as we climbed so we weren't blown off the ridge. My initial excitement was long gone. I think the only thing that kept me going were the O's waiting for me up ahead. I don't know what kept Sunjo going. Probably the Chinese climbers behind him and freedom ahead. We got to Camp 5 a little before 7, 25,196 feet. It seemed impossible that we could ever go any further. It was the end of the world, and it wasn't really a camp. It was a series of cleared platforms stretching up the north ridge for at least a quarter of a mile, with absolutely no shelter from the howling wind. The big platforms could hold 5 or 6 tents, the small platforms 1 or 2. Several of the platforms had tents on them, but it was hard to say how many people were up there. I suspected most of the tents were waiting for climbers coming up from Camp 4 or down from Camp 6 after their summit attempt. Our tiny rubble pile was just big enough for 2 tents pitched on the garbage of the former occupants. Yash had water boiling for tea, but what I was interested in was the mask strapped to his face, pumping O's into his lungs. He was moving twice as fast as we were. I grabbed a tank from the pile, pulled the mask out of my pack, hooked it up, and stuck my face in it. The feeling I had with the first lungful of oxygen is indescribable. Bliss is about as close as I could come, but it was way beyond that. Yash helped Sunjo set up his rig, and when he got it on, we looked at each other and started laughing. We were going to live. We might even make it to the summit. Interesting stuff, right? Lots of highs and lows on a summit climb like this. They saw a bunch of dead bodies, which is horrible. Frozen dead bodies. But then the excitement and the intensity, just wild. Let's continue. The Chinese are heading up to Camp 4 tomorrow. One of the climbers told ABC told Josh. You're kidding, Josh said. What about the acclimatization? These guys are acclimated. One of our climbers speaks a little Chinese. They told her they were up on K2 when they were ordered to come here. They haven't said it, but I don't think they're coming back down until they take a shot at the summit. They're like climbing machines. When are you heading up? The day after tomorrow, if the weather's good, Josh answered. I was going to hold off a little longer, but I took my people out for a climb today, and they all did pretty well. The virus seems to have run its course. We're heading up to Camp 4 in the morning. We'll see you on the way back. Good luck. Out. This was probably the last transmission we would hear. I wondered if Josh would be worried when he didn't pass me on his way up. I asked Sunjo how he was doing. The oxygen helps, but I'm still concerned. I had a lot of trouble today. You're not the only one. It's hard up here. I have to make it, he said, for my sisters and my mother. Those were great reasons to risk your life, I thought. But why was I doing it? For Josh's business? For my ego? Now that my brain had oxygen, I found myself really missing the 2 Ps, my mom, and Rolf. This got me thinking about the corpses we saw on the way up here. Who had they left behind? These were very uncomfortable questions to fall asleep on. Serious stuff. And I found that very interesting. What is Peak's real reason for doing this climb? Sunjo has pretty unselfish reasons. It's very interesting. Do you need a reason? I don't know. The oxygen was wonderful, but the masks were a pain in the butt to sleep in. It was hard to find a position where the straps didn't dig into your face. Also, the exhaust system stank. Small pools of icy slime collected on the mouthpiece valve. When I moved my head, slushy spit ran down my neck. Because of this, Sunjo and I were up early. We checked and rechecked our gear. Leaving something behind like a spare headlamp battery or a glove could be a death sentence. Yogi took the lead this time, leaving Yash to take us up to Camp 6. Our first obstacle was a steep snowfield that we had to 4-point with ice axes and crampons. Stupidly, I assumed that now we were on O's, it would be like climbing at sea level. Nothing could be further from the truth. By the time we reached the top of the snowfield, my lungs were screaming for air. I thought there was something the matter with my mask or the tank had run out of oxygen, but everything was working perfectly. The 2 liters of oxygen didn't simulate sea level. It simply allowed me to stay alive above 25,000 feet. And there was a huge difference between lying in a tent doing virtually nothing and climbing a steep snowfield on all fours. I took the little camera out and filmed Sunjo crabbing his way up to me. By the expression on his face, I can see he was having the same revelation I just had. I don't think I can make it, he gasped. I'm serious, Peak. This is too much. We just need to push it. We just pushed it too hard going up the field, I said with confidence that I didn't feel. We'll have to pace ourselves. He nodded, but there was fear in his eyes. I knew exactly how he felt. We had passed another 3 or 4 corpses on the way up. A few hours later, I stopped to rest and looked at my altimeter watch. We had just passed 26,000 feet and were officially in the death zone. Every minute from now on, we were dying a little. We stumbled into Camp 6 like 3 zombies. Yogi had the tents set up, but he didn't look much better than we did. He told Sunjo to get our stove going, boil some snow, and drink as much water as we could. The very idea of drinking or eating anything made my stomach lurch. I turned on the video camera and shot Sunjo lighting the stove, or trying to light the stove. It must have taken him 50 strokes to get the cigarette lighter going in the thin air. When it finally ignited, his thumb was bleeding like it had been sliced open with a knife. We gagged down as much water and food as we could, then wrapped up in our little sleeping bags to wait. Sleep was out of the question. The inside of the tent was filled with a thin layer of frost from our breath. Every time one of us moved, the freezing crystals fell on our faces. They say that when you die, your life flashes before your eyes. Mine was passing before my eyes in slow motion like a horror movie. I think it was the corpses that did it. I thought of Mom falling off that wall, the boy I'd never met falling off the Flatiron building, Sunjo hanging by a thread on that ice wall, and Sunjo's father saving my father, then dying of heart failure. The only thing that stopped the depressing payback was the tent flap opening and the appearance of Yogi's masked face. We go, he said. Well, not quite. It was more like, we get ready to go. They made us drink more water, then told us to do our toilet, which is a lot easier said than done, at 30 degrees below zero. 2 hours later, we were ready. We left for the summit of Mount Everest. I looked at my watch. It was 1:35 a.m. We had 12 hours to get there. Crazy. So here we go, finally making their summit attempt, and it's just ridiculous, right? Just seeing all the dead bodies. What does that do to your thoughts? Wild stuff. And I like that this book is engaging with these ideas and showing how just really serious something like this is. Like climbing and stuff, and I'm sure you guys have climbed, you guys have talked about that you've done like climbing walls and stuff. It's awesome. Even I've talked about a bit of climbs, but nothing like this, right? This is just wild. Something I'll never do. I don't think it's worth it. And it seems to just be leaving garbage and bodies on this mountain that doesn't need it. It's just extra pollution, right? All right, in the next part, we'll look at their attempt at the summit. They have 12 hours to get there. Exciting. See you then, guys.